Thank you all so much for being a part of tonight's student ministry development course. Tonight's course is on making disciples. The first week, we talked about developing a dream team, and we talked extensively about that, developing your volunteers, figuring out what you need and how to prepare them to serve. And then on our last time together, we talked about leveraging resources. And in that conversation, we talked about that first resource that we have is ourself, and how that we should not just manage our time, but we should also manage our energy. So we're looking at who we are as a resource. We have to think about the things that we have to do in a day, in a week, or for our ministry or our organization that we're working with, and make sure we're doing the right thing on the right days so that we can maximize who we are and what we have to offer. I believe it's so true that if I do not bring my best self to the table, I don't benefit, and neither do the people who I serve or the people who I'm honored to serve under or serve with. They're not getting the best of me, and they're not getting the best out of me. So it's very, very important that we manage ourselves as a resource, make sure we manage our energy, not just our time. Then we talked about understanding what we have in our organization, and we do that through doing a SWOT analysis. And that SWOT analysis helps us to look at the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats within our organization or within our ministry. And it's very important that we look at those things and that we understand those things so that we can know exactly what we're working with. Anytime I have gone into a situation working with the organization for the very first time, I don't think I have ever been a part of an organization doing student ministry and started something from the ground up. It's always been, I was hired at a church, or I came into a situation that was already existing. So I had to get an understanding of what was done before I got there, what was going on since I had been there, and then I had to get an understanding of where we wanted to go. So it's very, very important that you take the time that you need to get a clear understanding of your organization, and that SWOT analysis is very, very important. When you do that SWOT analysis, it allows you to look at the strengths and the weaknesses, because you don't want to just look at strength. You want to look at strengths and weaknesses, and then you want to figure out what are the opportunities that we have, and then what are the threats. And those threats are very, very important, because you have to make sure in any organization that you're working with that the leaders are aware of what may be a potential threat for us. It may not be a threat today, but it may be a potential threat. So things like not having adequate volunteer participation and having large number of students. Down the line, that becomes a threat for the organization. So those are things that you have to identify and that you have to be ready to speak on and say, hey, these are things that I've noticed, these are things that I've seen, and I think that we have an opportunity here to make sure that we are looking at these things so we don't get into trouble later. We don't get into a situation to where we have someone in an unsafe predicament, and that can be a child, the organization, or a teacher, an adult, or anything like that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that on next week when we talk about safe sanctuary, developing a safe space for everybody. So we talked about understanding where you are, and then knowing exactly what you need. So when you understand where you are, it helps inform what you need. And also when you understand what the vision is. We talked about that in our first session about developing a dream team. You got to understand the vision. You got to know what do the owners of this organization, the pastor of this church, the leader of this area, excuse me, what do they want to see? What do they really want? What do they really desire to see for this area? And sometimes we have to be bold enough to really ask those hard questions, because sometimes leaders don't know how to articulate exactly what they want. They'll say, we just want it to operate. We just want it to work. And then you get in there and you do everything that you can, everything that you know to do to make it work. And then they're like, that's not really what I was looking for. Well, they may have not been clear. So you got to really make sure you're pushing those ministry leaders, you're pushing the pastor, you're pushing the organization leader to give you clear and direct communication on what they want to see. So once you know what they want to see, then you know exactly what you need. If it's people, if it's resources, if it's food, supplies, whatever it is, you know exactly what it is that you need to start looking for. So you have to know what you want, then you have to know what you need, and then you start leveraging. You find who has what you need, and then you find out who is deficient in something that you have. So you have to know what you have. So if you have children, or if you have teenagers, or if you have strength or the muscle, and then you find an organization within your organization or a department within your organization that needs what you need, then you figure out, how do we leverage these resources? Because I need you and you need me. So there is an opportunity for us to work together. So leveraging resources is actually one of something that's very fun for me to talk about. And again, we don't just leverage resources within our organization, but there are always opportunities for us to leverage resources outside of our organization. We look at those places and those companies and those vendors that we can partner with that need us. Once before, we partnered with a bank that wanted to open up student accounts. Well, we had students. They were a bank who wanted to open up student accounts, but they were also willing to fund some things. So you find out what these organizations, these vendors that are out in the community of whatever your organization or your church is, you find these organizations or vendors that need you, and then you need them, and then you figure a way to work together. So that's leveraging resources. So tonight we're going to talk about making disciples. Tonight's class is on making disciples. Tonight we may not complete our entire hour unless there are a lot of questions and answers, because the information that I have is not robust. It's not a lot of information, but I think it's very important information when we talk about making disciples. Now, I know when you hear the word, because for most of us that are a part of this call, it's student ministry, so it's typically about church. We think disciples, we think Jesus, we think scripture, we think becoming more like Christ. Well, tonight, we do all want to become more like Christ. That is definitely the goal. That is definitely what we all want. But tonight, when we talk about making disciples, tonight, we're talking about this idea of reproduction. Okay, so tonight we're not talking about, creating Christians. So we're not talking about Christians. We're not talking about becoming a Christian, because our hope is we're all Christians, and the people serving with us, the people working with us, they're Christian. That's our hope. But tonight we want to talk about this idea of reproducing ourselves. Making disciples, being able to reproduce ourselves. You have to understand first, what is a disciple? A disciple is a follower of a student or a teacher or a leader. So a disciple is just a follower. A disciple is someone who follows you in a sense to where they want to become like you, or they're prepared to receive from you in a way where they become like you. Your children should be your disciples, not just that you're trying to make them Christian. We want them to be Christians. We want them to understand the call of God on each and every one of their lives, but we also want them to glean from something that we do great, something that we admire about ourselves. I know growing up for me, my mother has always been a very tidy, organized woman. My mother, years ago, she owned a cleaning company when she lived in Maryland. In Baltimore, her and one of her best friends, they owned a cleaning company, and they would clean restaurants, and they would clean apartments and houses, and they would clean companies. But my mother has always, all of our lives, been like the super neat, tidy person. Like, we used to say stuff like, we could eat off the floor at mama's house, because we always knew my mom was very, very neat, clean, and very tidy. Well, my mom would say things like, none of my kids got that from me. Now, we're not nasty, but no one got all of it from her. We're not nasty. We don't have dirty houses and things like that. But my mom would always say, no one got everything from her. Like, my mom is the kind that'll come to your house and, kind of wipe her finger across your TV and try to ask you, why haven't you dust? Why is there dust on the TV? Why does your TV have fingerprints? Well, Mama moved it, and I forgot to wipe it. But my mom has just always been a very, very tidy person. But my mom wanted us to become disciples. She wanted us to be followers of her in that area of her life. So tonight, when we talk about making disciples, we're talking about creating people, or reproducing ourselves in a way to where we find the things in us that we know are working, the things that are good, and then we invest those things in somebody else. Is that making sense to everybody?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. And I'm going to unmute you guys again, but if you have any questions, just unmute yourself and you can always just jump in at any time. Okay, so we're going to jump into this, making disciples. So it's this idea of creating or reproducing yourselves. Okay, so a disciple is one who accepts and assists in spreading your message. Okay, a disciple is one who accepts, so they have to accept the mission, and then they have to assist in spreading your message. So when you are a leader, it's very important that you make disciples. Every leader needs disciples. You can call them what you want to call them. You can call them people who serve with you, people who serve under you. But in essence, if they are leading under you or they're leading as a result of you giving them a certain mandate or as a result of you giving them a certain assignment, they essentially become disciples. I work for a pastor, so I am a disciple. He gives me an assignment to complete, and I complete that task on his behalf. So I accept and then I assist in spreading his message. Whatever that message is, I accept the assignment, and then I assist in spreading that message. All right. So we have to make sure that we're training disciples. The one thing that you have to remember is you can't train someone to be something that you are not. You cannot train someone to be something that you are not. You can try with everything in you to teach people to become something that you are not, but it's only so long that you can pretend to be something that you're not. So that's why you can't teach people to be something that you are not. You can't train people to be honest when you're not honest. You can't train people to be timely when you're not timely. You can't train people to have integrity when you don't have integrity. You can only train people to be what you are. So that means it's important that you first become a disciple. So you have to make sure that you're following and that you are following appropriately behind the person who leads you. Because typically in situations like this, with student ministry, as a student ministry leader or a person serving in student ministry, there's somebody who's serving over you. So you have to make sure that you become a disciple to them or to him or to her. And that could very well be your pastor or that could be your organization leader. You have to make sure that you first become a disciple. You have to make sure that you become a disciple because you cannot train anyone to be something that you are not. So then you have to ask yourself, what are the things in me that I want to see? So tonight's class is really a lot more introspective, so that because I want us to start thinking about as we are developing as leaders, as we are preparing to lead, or as we are continuing to lead or sharpening our leadership skills, we have to sometimes become very introspective and reflective to make sure we are the leader that we want to see in other people. Because in making disciples, what I essentially do is I create other leaders. I create leaders over check-in. I create leaders over small group. I create leaders over large group. I create leaders over high school, leaders over middle school, leaders over elementary education. Whatever it is that you're leading, you then are responsible for creating a disciple or making a disciple, or we can use the term making a leader. So you have to be introspective to look at yourself to see, are there things in me that I want to see in somebody else? Am I the type of leader who listens to my leader? When my leader says do A, B, and C, am I doing it C, A, and B? Or am I doing it B, C, and A? Or am I doing it as my leader has asked me to do? Because what we understand is how I lead is how I will teach others to lead. We can never teach anybody to be something that we are not. So we have to pay attention to that. Think about it. As a leader, what is it in me that I don't like? Or what is it in me that I don't want to see reproduced? Because that's what other people are going to see. I used to struggle, and I won't say I used to, I still sometimes struggle with time. It's something I'm working on. Actually, and my pastor, Pastor Darius Daniels, not long ago, it's probably, let's see, I've been in New Jersey a little over a year now, so it may have been month 4 or 5. I'm still getting to know my pastor. I'm still learning, and he taught me a very important lesson about leadership. Now, Pastor, if he's doing any meeting, and I'll be very transparent, it was a rather embarrassing moment for me, but I knew it was a moment where God was teaching me something, and I took the lesson. I walked away at first with my tail tucked, and then when I got to my car, I heard the Lord say, now learn from it and grow. And I got a different perspective and went on about my day. But Pastor, when he has meetings and things like that, he's very timely, and he expects that we're very timely, especially if it's something where he's pouring in or, going above and beyond to make sure as leaders we're sharp, we're refueled, and we have what we need. So anyway, my pastor's having this particular meeting, and he would have them early in the morning, and that was a stretch for him, and it was a stretch for us. But he figured if he's stretching, we could stretch as well. So it was one day, it was one of the particular meetings, and we were coming to these meetings, and one particular day, I walked in the meeting 4 minutes late. And I know somebody may say, it was just 4 minutes. You should have a 5-minute grace. And in my mind, I was thinking, I should have a 5-minute grace. It's just 4 minutes. But I never forget, it was 4 minutes. I walked in that meeting at 8:04. And my pastor turned around and told me, Cherie, thank you so much for being here, but go ahead and come back next week. We've already began. And I was like, okay. So I snatched my bag back on my shoulder, and I turned around and I walked out of the room. Now, the room was filled with people, coworkers and other leaders in the organization, and they were there, and they were all kind of like, nothing. We can't say anything. And when I walked out of the room, I felt embarrassed and I felt shamed, and I felt like, man, I pushed to get here. I'm just 4 minutes late. As soon as I got in the car, as I said before, I was like, what's the lesson in this? And I know I heard the Lord say, grow from it. So from that, I realized it was some things in me that I don't want to see. Now, it's a pet peeve of mine for people to always, and I understand life happens and things like that happen, but for people to always just be late, or people to always, but that's an area where I've struggled, and that's an area where I see it in my leadership. So I see it in people who I lead or disciples that I'm making. I see that. So I can't fight against it, or I can't come against it, or I can't, be in a position where I'm not understanding, because that's an area that I've had to struggle with. So you have to make sure you're looking at yourself, and you're making sure I look at and I see what are the things in me that I don't want to see, or what are the things in me that I don't want to duplicate. So it's pushed me to be more timely. It's pushed me to make sure that my word is my bond, because another thing that God started dealing with me about with it is that it's an issue of integrity. Do what you say you're going to do. Be where you say you're going to be, when you say you're going to be there. So you have to be very, very conscious of, what do I see in me that I don't want duplicated? Because who I am as a leader is who I am as a leader. I always tell people, I am one person. I am not a dichotomy. I am not two different people. I'm not one person at church and somebody else at home. I really am one person. The silly person you see is a silly person you get all the time. I may not be as silly at home because I'm the only person here, and being silly here would kind of be silly. So I'm not as silly at home, but the person that I am is the person that I am. So when you're leading, everything about you comes out, even the things that you aren't aware, that comes out. And many of you that are on the call, you're parents. So I'm sure in your children, there are attributes that they automatically pick up from you, gestures and things like that, that you didn't necessarily say, I want you to learn this. And you may be sometimes in the back of your mind thinking, that's not the part of me that I wanted you to pick up. But because you are who you are and you serve as a leader to them, everything about you is leading them. And so the person that you're training to be a leader, the person that you're training to be a disciple, the person that you're training to work on your behalf, they're picking up everything. They're picking up everything. I know we also have school teachers on the call. So even in that, your kids that are in your classroom, they pick up your gestures, they pick up your mannerisms, they pick up things that you do and you say. So we have to be mindful that we think about, what is it in me that I do not want to see? So you have to become what you want to see. So the type of leader you should be is, you should be the kind of leader that you want to see. Because the type of leader that you are is the type of leader that you'll create. I know that was kind of a tongue twister. You have to be the kind of leader that you want to see, because the type of leader that you are is the type of leader that you will create. You have to be what you want to see, because the type of leader that you are is the type of leader that you'll create. Everything that you are is what you will begin to duplicate. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about how Jesus made disciples, okay? We're going to talk a little bit about how Jesus made disciples. But before we do, I do want to ask, does anyone have any questions, any thoughts, any comments about what we've said so far?
You're doing good.
Awesome, awesome. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you so much. Again, if you have something to say, you can just unmute yourself and then everyone will be able to hear you. All right. So again, one thing I want everyone to remember, the ultimate goal is to reproduce. Making disciples, the ultimate goal is to reproduce. Remember, you become what you want to see, because the type of leader that you are is the type of leader that you will create. So whatever it is that you're not liking in yourself, deal with you first. You've been called to leadership. You may have been thrust into leadership. You may have been selected. You may have wanted a position or wanted to do something. Whatever it is the reason or how you found yourself in a leadership position, use this time now or start moving forward, looking introspectively and seeing, what about me don't I want to see? Because I'm a leader. And as a leader, I create leaders. Leaders create leaders, because anybody who serves under you, anybody who works with you, they are leaders as well. So become what you want to see. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about how Jesus made disciples. All right. So disciple making is the process of reproduction. Disciple making is the process of reproduction. So we're going to look at how Jesus made disciples. The first thing Jesus did when he made disciples is he went through a selection process. So this is the three things that we have to do. When we are looking to make disciples, when we're looking to choose leaders, when we're looking to create or to reproduce ourselves, when we're looking to reproduce ourselves, there is first a selection process. You got to think through the selection process. Now you may say, well, Cherie, how do I select people to lead, or how do I select disciples to train or create? You select them based on knowing your need. So I don't know if you guys have noticed, but every class kind of builds on each other. So you realize how to develop a dream team. You got to know what the vision is and things like that. Then they're leveraging resources. Once you know what the vision is, you know what you need, you've assessed your area, then you start figuring out who has what I need. So in order for you to create or to make these disciples, you've got to select. You've got to know what you need. You've got to know what you're working with. So there is a selection process, and the selection process has to be taken very seriously. So I get the opportunity to select leaders. So I get an opportunity to do some training where I serve. I get an opportunity to train. I get an opportunity to select and some choose people. But in that does not happen by happenstance. That does not happen just because somebody wore the right outfit. That does not happen because I'm just in need. Because we learned in developing a dream team, when you are doing it out of haste, you usually select the wrong person. When you're doing it out of a space of desperation, you will more than likely get someone who's not going to be a benefit or an asset to your team, to your leadership team, or to your organization. So you have to first make sure you take the selection process very seriously. But you can't select unless you know what you're looking for. But that selection process should be done very carefully, and it should be done with prayer. Because when we pray, God begins to open our eyes. And when we pray, God begins to show us, and he gives us discernment on who we need to select. Some years ago, I was serving at a church in Houston, Texas. It was the first mega church that I served at in downtown Houston. It was an amazing church, inner city, urban church. Our main areas of ministry were to those that were hungry, homeless, and people suffering or infected or affected by HIV or AIDS. So those were our three H's: HIV, hunger, and homelessness. So those are our three H's. So it was an amazing church in the downtown inner city church. It was amazing. But there I was I'm talking about selecting a person. So there, I needed volunteers. So we did this appeal for volunteers, and I got all kind of people. And I didn't screen, I didn't do a really, really good job at making sure I gave people a clear understanding of what I needed. So I select all these people, and then I get people who we get them in the room with kids, and all they want to do is either play basketball themselves. So I had some great guys, but we were we did our youth ministry inside of a gym. So we had basketball goals and we had video games and things like that. So we had some men who connect. So I'm thinking, oh, great. And I didn't really screen them a lot. I mean, other than the normal background check and things like that, they were safe people, but they weren't equipped and they really didn't want to serve in student ministry. They just kind of wanted to do some regular volunteering. So they came in, they played basketball and they played video games. And then we had a group of women. All they wanted to do was stir the cheese for the nachos. And I remember when I realized I don't have any volunteers that I need. I remember saying, I don't need any more cheese stirrers. And my pastor was like, what do you mean, Cherie, you don't need any more cheese stirrers? I said, I don't need anybody else who just wants to come in and stir cheese and throw around a basketball. I need people who are serious about seeing change in the life of a young person. Because for me, if I'm gonna play basketball with you, it's because I'm trying to get to know you. For me, if I'm gonna feed you a meal, it's because I'm trying to break down those walls that kids automatically put up when they've been in certain situations or exposed to certain things. So I needed to have people who were interested in really serving a community of young people who needed us the most. So I had to start being very selective about the people that I brought in leadership. So I started an interview process for the people that I selected. Now I don't have to do it by way of an interview. I use discernment. I ask God to show me the people who I need to have on my team based on who I have already that I'm working with and people that are in my sphere of influence. But the selection process is very, very important. The selection process is very important. So that's the first thing that you have to do. And then when you select people, you have to consecrate them. Remember, again, we're talking about how Jesus chose disciples. He selected them and then he consecrated them. So when we select the people that we want to make disciples out of or that we want to make leaders out of, we have to consecrate them. And we all understand that consecration process is just a process of making a person ready. So when you select a leader, then you have to train the leader. When you select a person, then you have to make sure they have the tools, they are consecrated, they are set apart for a particular use, that they are ready and equipped and prepared to do exactly what you need them to do. If not, again, that selection process is not even necessary if you don't consecrate or if you don't prepare a person to serve. So after you select them, then you have to make sure that you consecrate them, that you prepare them, that you make them ready, that you give them the proper tools that they need to be successful in whatever area you are causing or charging them to give leadership over. You can't be upset with people who lead in your area if you have not equipped them. You cannot. The only person you can be upset with is yourself. But what happens is the reason why people feel ill-prepared is because, again, we create the type of leaders that we are. Sometimes we feel ill-prepared or we feel like I don't know everything. So if I don't know everything, I can't teach someone else everything. So in the new position that I'm in now at Change Church, if I would have came in and I didn't take the time to do some evaluating and assessing and get some clear understanding, I wouldn't be able to train other leaders because there wouldn't be a process to train them because I wouldn't know enough. So it's very, very important that you know what you need to know so that you can consecrate or you can train or you can prepare the leaders. So the first thing in this discipleship or this disciple-making process is selection. The selection process is very, very important. Ask God for discernment. Ask people around you for recommendations. We are soon starting to train some new coordinators for the area of ministry that I serve in, and some of them were chosen based on recommendations. Who do you recommend in this area? Asking other leaders, who do you recommend who can serve in this area as well? All right? So the second thing is impartation. So there's selection, and then there's impartation. There's selection. The selection process is very important. And then there's impartation. Because again, disciple making is about reproduction. Disciple making is about reproduction. I'm reproducing myself. So you have to be prepared to impart into someone else everything that you have in you. You have to be prepared to impart into someone else everything that you have in you. Some years ago, I served at a church, and my supervisor would always tell me, when you leave, you should be exhausted because you should have given it everything that you have. And when we lead, and that was when I leave for the day, but when we lead in whatever area we lead in, when we are training other people, we should walk away exhausted because we should have given everything that we have. So it's important that we select properly, but then it's important that we take the impartation process very seriously. The impartation process is very serious because in the event that you don't impart everything you know, in the event that you don't impart everything that you aren't creating disciples. Because remember, the discipleship process is about reproduction, recreation, right? But if you don't make sure that you're imparting everything that you are, you won't have something that looks like you. That's why it's important that you search your heart to find out what's in me that I don't want to see. What's the stuff that I don't want to reproduce? What's the stuff that I don't want to impart? Because I need to deal with those things. I need to make sure that I'm healthy. I need to make sure that I'm whole. I need to make sure that I'm healthy emotionally and spiritually so that I don't impart that into other people. Because it doesn't matter how we try to fake it. Who we really are is what will impart in somebody else. So the selection process is important, but the impartation process is even more important because that's when we get to give everything that we have. This entire month of October, my job is to impart everything I have in me into the leaders that serve under me. So I'm going to be evaluating parts of me that I don't want to see to make sure I get those parts in check so that I can impart into the people who serve under me everything that I have in me so they can ultimately lead like me. Now, I don't want them to be mimics because discipleship making or reproduction is not about making mini me's. It's not about making mini me's, but it's about making a mini me. Many, M-A-N-Y. Making M-A-N-Y, me, not M-I-N-I, me. So I'm not trying to make people who look like me and say it exactly like me, but I'm trying to duplicate myself in a way that we can get the work of the Lord done, that we can get the vision accomplished, that we can make sure that we're growing the way that we need to as an organization. Is that making sense to everybody?
Yeah.
Anybody have any questions or comments about that?
No.
Awesome. I love those yeses and those nos. It's like yes and no. Okay, so I'll go on. I probably got another 10 to 12 minutes, and then I'll take some questions and answers. And again, if we're done before our hour tonight, that's great. I don't think we'll need the full hour, but I'm going to go on. We have one more part to this, and then we'll be out of the way, and I'll take some additional questions and answers if there are any. So, as I was saying, the first thing is you have to have a great selection process. Then there is this impartation process where I impart everything that I am so that I can reproduce myself. And again, the goal is not to make mini me's, M-I-N-I, but it is to make many, M-A-N-Y, or many me. So I need to be able to duplicate myself, reproduce myself so that I can make sure there's someone for every area because I can't do everything. And one person like me can't do everything. Two people like me can't do everything. When the vision is big, you need many people to do the work of ministry. So the third thing, so after you make the right selection, then you do this impartation. Then the third thing is delegation. So you select, you impart, and then you delegate. You select, you impart, and then you delegate. You have the right selection, then you impart yourself, you give them everything that you got, and then you delegate. And that delegation process is this process of giving people authority to work on your behalf. Giving people authority to work on your behalf. Giving people the authority that they need to work on your behalf. Because when you duplicate yourself, you shouldn't have to keep checking back at yourself. Because once it's done, it's done. So if, let's say, for instance, an area where I lead, Don, you serve, once I give you authority, I stick by that authority. We have service coordinators. Once I give a service coordinator authority, I stand by that authority. So if someone says, well, Don said that the children, we are, let's see, something hypothetical, that we're no longer checking in at a certain time. If I'm not there, or I've given authority, I'm not there, I'm not in that space, because I don't have to be everywhere. Once you've delegated, or once you've imparted and created many people that lead, you don't have to be everywhere. So if someone says, Don says that we're no longer taking students for today, I stand by that authority. I've given her authority. Authority has been shifted. She now has the authority to do what she feels is necessary. That's why the selection process is very important. If you don't take the time to use discernment, if you don't take the time to screen or to pray about the people you select, giving the wrong people authority could ruin everything you've worked for. Giving the wrong people authority. If you give the wrong people at check-in authority, it can ruin an entire day. You give the wrong teacher authority, it can ruin the entire day. But you have to make sure you select the right people. And when you select the right people, when you give them that delegated authority, you can stand by that. So the pastor that I serve under, Pastor Daniels, he's given me delegated authority to run the area that I run at Change Church, student ministry area. So if there's a decision that I make, he stands by that. I mean, I'm not trying to tear the organization up, but he trusts me enough. The selection process that he went through to get me where I am was a selection process that would make him comfortable with delegating authority to me, in a sense where he could trust. If somebody said, Cherie said, we're no longer doing middle school on Sundays, we're just doing them during our midweek experience, he can trust that that was the best decision for the organization. I hope that makes sense. So you have to select, make sure you do that selection process very carefully. Then there's an impartation process, but then there's a delegation process. There's this shift of authority. The people who I lead, the people who I train, the people who I make disciples or I reproduce myself in, I then give them the shift in authority to where they can operate on my behalf. And that's very important. If this is to work, if you are to create many people, if you are to infuse yourself in more than one person, you have to be comfortable with the delegating of authority, transferring of authority. And when people don't want to transfer authority, it's usually because they have insecurities. So that's why it's important that you check who you are. Because sometimes we'll feel like, oh, well, they may do it better than me, or people may like them better than they like me, or people may respond to them different than they respond to me. All of that's okay, because all of that is still a part of a team or organization that you lead in. And when you start to make disciples, people who look like you, people who are reproduced out of who you are, it's okay for people to possibly connect with them better than they connect with you. It's okay, because at the end of the day, we're still serving one cause. We're still serving one agenda. We still have one theme. So it's one man, one sound, right? So you have the selection process, the impartation process, and then the delegation process. The selection process, the impartation process, and then that's the delegation process. This transfer of authority to where now I've selected you, I've trained you, and now I'm going to give you authority to do everything that you need to do to operate effectively and efficiently in ministry. So that's pretty much it. That's how you make disciples. You got to select them. And you have to do that very thoughtfully and carefully. Then you have to impart everything you have in them. But you can't do that until you've dealt with yourself, till you've gone introspective. What is it in me that I want to see? You know, we have to understand that I become, or that I should want to see something that's in me. Because the people that I lead will become like me. People that I'm imparting in. So there's a selection process, there's the impartation process, and there is the delegation process. All right? So are there any questions tonight about anything that I've said tonight or anything I've said over our last 3 classes? No questions, no questions. Either that means I was thorough in the presentation or I am not doing a good job at all. I hope it's number one, but this is the first one. I'm growing. I'm trying to be a better me every day. But does this make sense to everyone?
A lot of sense.
Awesome. That's good. So again, just as a final recap, and then we'll get ready to get off of here. And then what I'll do is, as I've done every week, it takes a little time for the file to compress, and then I will create it into a YouTube link, and then I'll send it out to everyone. Several people weren't able to get on tonight just because of work and life and things like that, but we'll send that out for you all to enjoy or share with your friends and family or people that you know or people that you feel may, this information may add value to their life. But as just a recap, the word disciple is to become a follower or a student of a leader, teacher. So when we talk about making disciples, tonight's class is called Making Disciples. When we talk about that, it's just creating or reproducing yourself. It's all about reproduction, reproducing who I am. And then we have to remember, you can't train someone to be something that you are not. You cannot train someone to be something that you are not. And people will become what they see. People will become what they see in you and because what they see in you is what you'll infuse in them. And then the process by which Jesus chose disciples is the same process by which we will choose disciples. There is a selection process, there is an impartation process, and then there is a delegation process. And Jesus did the same thing. He selected men, then he imparted into them, and then he gave them authority. And he does the same thing with each and every one of us. The Bible says that he chose us. Then it says he imparts himself into us. It says, greater works shall you do. And then he gives us this authority. He gives us authority. He delegates to us to go into all of the world and make disciples. So God, then he delegates to us and gives us an authority. So we do the same thing. So just as a recap, we select, we impart, and then we delegate. That's all I have for you guys on tonight. Again, thank you all so much for your time. Thank you all so much for being a part of this student development e-course. It is richly blessing my life, and I do hope that it is adding value to each and every one of your lives. Our next class will be on next Monday, my apologies, and next Monday's date is October the 9th. So our class will be next Monday, October the 9th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and our class will be on Safe Sanctuary, creating a safe space for everyone. So next week class is going to be an exciting class. Actually, one of my favorite things to talk about is Safe Sanctuary. A couple of these are my favorite, but that is one of my favorite things to talk about is Safe Sanctuary. Again, so I'll see you guys on next Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I appreciate you all. Thank you so much. And I hope that tonight's class has added value to your lives. God bless you. And I'll be praying for each and every one of you. If you need me for anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. God bless you.